This is the Jade Oracle Saga. First book, The Awakening. Written by Jesus B. Vilches. Translated by Moray Greig. Music by Evan King and Adrian von Ziegler. All music under Private and Creative Commons license. Narrated by voices cloned from real voice actors using Elevenlabs AI technology. All voices belong to real people. A Vilches Indie Books production.
A brief note on translation. It has been my pleasure and privilege to work on The Awakening, the English version of the first book in the Jade Oracle Saga. I would like to thank Vilches for giving me the opportunity to work on this project. The work has been tough and challenging at times, but it has always been fulfilling. I work full-time in my regular job, and so I have only been able to dedicate a portion of my spare time to it. But I am delighted that we have managed to complete the first book and at last bring Jade Oracle to an English reading audience. Vilches has been a pleasure to work with. He has shown great patience, curiosity, and dedication in completing this English adaptation. He has always been open to discussions and suggestions in bringing La Flor de Jade, Spanish original name of the saga, to an English reading audience. Through working with the author, I have seen that Jade Oracle is a labor of love for him. He knows the lore and history of the fantasy world he has constructed in perfect detail, and he is dedicated to making the English version as accessible and enjoyable to the English reader as possible. A little background on my road to editing The Awakening. In the mid-1990s, I decided I wanted to learn Spanish. Between 1995 and 2000, I spent 2 years studying, living and working in Spain, during which time I picked up a reasonable knowledge of the Spanish language. In order to maintain and practice the language in subsequent years, I used to read novels in Spanish. And so it was that in 2011, while searching Amazon for a new Spanish novel to read, I came across a book called El Enviado, from the Flor de Jade saga by Jesus B. Vilches. It was a story set in a dark fantasy world populated by elves, orcs, and other fantasy races. Being interested in the genre and the premise, it immediately caught my interest, and I immediately decided to buy the book. And I never looked back. I thoroughly enjoyed the first book and moved on to the second and the third. I became hooked. I eagerly awaited the release of each new novel until I eventually finished the sixth and, theoretically, penultimate book of the saga in 2023. I avidly await the completion and release of the finals books in the saga. Fleur de Jade is a gripping and fascinating saga. It seems to start out as a conventional story in a typical fantasy world where the forces of good are threatened by the powers of evil. But as the story progresses, things become much more ambiguous. The lines between good and evil become blurred and, in some cases, are erased entirely. I found the whole approach compelling, interesting, and enjoyable to read. Indeed, it has become one of my favorite book series of all time. So much so that I always believed the story would appeal to Anglophone audiences and often wondered if the saga would ever be translated into English. And now that process has begun. In the summer of 2023, Vilches contacted me. He had seen a review I had written in English on the first book and asked if I would be interested in helping him to adapt it for an English-reading audience. Being a huge fan of the saga, I agreed to assist him in the translation of the first novel, El Enviado. And so, in the late summer of 2023, I started working on the translation of The Awakening, the first book of the Jade Oracle Saga. However, I must make clear that I am not a professional translator. I am just an enthusiastic fan of the saga with a reasonable knowledge of Spanish who has limited experience in writing fan fiction. With that in mind, I would like to provide some information on how the work was carried out for those who are interested. I do not translate the text directly from the original Spanish version. Vilches generated an initial English translation using an AI tool he has developed. Mostly, I edited the English translation directly from the text provided. But sometimes, I refer to the Spanish original, where additional clarity is required. Typically, I edited blocks of text of between 45 and 60 pages. The translation can vary in expression and clarity. Some paragraphs need no change at all. Many just need refinement by changing the odd word or expression. Some need to be partially reworded. Sometimes a paragraph may need substantial rework. In some cases, I have deleted sections of text that I felt were unnecessary. In other cases, I have added text that does not appear in the original version. Where necessary, I have consulted with Vilches on areas of the text that I have queries about. Often this has led to detailed discussion before coming to a conclusion and a final decision. When editing the translated text, I follow some principles that I thought I would share with you. Vilches is the ultimate arbiter and decision-maker for this adaptation. Any change should be consistent with his vision for the saga. There is no exception to this rule. For that reason, Vilches has seen and approved every change I have made to the translated text he provides. Whenever I make a change, I leave the original text in place so that Vilches can see the change made. Thus, he is aware of and approves every change made. In some cases, Vilches has questioned a suggested change and provided his reasoning for his query. Sometimes I will concur with his opinion and will incorporate his suggested amendment into the edited text. Other times, I have persuaded him that my suggested change is the original text. Notwithstanding what I have said above, I have tried to retain some of the literary style of the author where I can. In the Spanish version, Vilches regularly invokes flowery and detailed descriptions, often using colorful metaphors. In many cases, these cannot be replicated exactly in English, thus requiring an adjustment to the text. Sometimes I let an odd turn of phrase pass, even though it is not typically used in English. In this way, I hope that the English version will somewhat reflect the unique and rich style of the author. I have ensured that there is no more than mild swearing in the text. There should be nothing stronger than the odd bloody hell or shit in the book. The translated text initially came out with much stronger language in a few isolated cases, reflecting the original Spanish version. But I toned it down with the agreement of the author so that it is acceptable to a wider readership. For names of characters, I have proposed using exactly the same names as in the Spanish version where possible. This is to ensure consistency for both English and Spanish readers, so when fans discuss or refer to the books, they use the same names. The only exception would be where a name causes confusion. The name is either offensive or unintentionally comical. The name does not resonate well in English, or the author wishes to change the name for the English version, usually because the original name has a Spanish origin. In practice, there have only been a handful of name changes and none relating to the prime characters in the saga. For names of places, I have proposed keeping the original name if it is unique to the fantasy world. But where the name is of Spanish origin, it will usually be translated. For example, the village Diez Cañadas was translated as 10 Glens in the translated text. Read. And I hope you all enjoy the book as much as I did. Again, I would like to thank Jesus B. Vilches for giving me the opportunity to collaborate with him on this huge project. And I hope that the book has great success and attracts a large following of dedicated fans. Moray Greig, Assistant Editor.
The Gathering. And so our sad eyes will witness, for others will see the same spears, melted in different forges by disparate hands, come together once more. The same ones that were once drenched in blood. Those whose eyes are unwilling to see will not see, and I fear the blind will be numberless. Those who refuse to believe will not believe. Thus will the unbelievers be, to my regret, but to the glory of the shadow. And so it will be, despite the snows of winter, beyond time and space. From unknown forests they shall meet the designs of the gods, beyond the crossroads of worlds, where 1,000 paths become one.
According to the translation of Heliocario, the Trudit, this is a fragment of the first enigma of Arcanoreth. As originally formulated, the designs of the gods, it could be translated as meaning the designated. Actually, this verse has always been understood as the chosen of the gods, but it may just mean the choice, the will of the gods. For reasons I will not disclose here, I have suggested the less conventional translation.
Chapter 1. This must be a dream. Knowledge is a path. The present would never have been reached if the first among us had remained still and quiet. First Council of the Arthras. Sacred books from the monks of Avatar. God of wisdom. Someplace, sometime. 1371 Imperial Calendar. 2372 after Elven Rift.
They may never know how they got there. How did they leave behind a past, their families, their friends, their identities? It was a world that felt so real, an existence that seemed unique, tied to a predetermined fate from which they would never escape. Maybe they will never really know how it all vanished into thin air, how it all disappeared without reason or any logical cause. I don't think we ever found an answer to our simple question: what brought us there? What took us away from our daily routines and everyday lives? What threw us into such a hostile, wild, and yet strangely beautiful world? Asking why seemed the easier question. Perhaps the legends are true, and we simply ended up here because it was our destiny. There are forces in the universe that are far too powerful and complex for us to understand. Forces that are in a constant state of change and evolution. Forces that can be influenced by our actions but over which we have no real control. Maybe we were just meant to be there. I can't see it any other way now. The beginning of our story was fraught with danger, uncertainty, and apprehension. Just as a lone traveler sets out on a perilous journey with neither a guide, a mapped route, nor a definitive destination. How did we arrive at this point? How did we put our foot on the first rung of a ladder that would lead us on an endless ascent, and ultimately to the discovery of our true selves? All we have are theories and speculations. But believe me, I now know that it was I who brought them all here, and there is a long way to go before it will all make sense to you. Silence, darkness, shadows.
Claudia, is that you?
Alex?
A dark figure came slowly towards her, barely visible in the dim light. She looked at him with a blank expression, unaware of the world around her.
Claudia, is it really you? What are you doing in my dream?
In your dream?
Slowly, she looked around her. She struggled to process what was happening. She turned to look at the young man. Her eyes were full of confusion and bewilderment. Alex, on the other hand, showed no sign of unease. In fact, he seemed quite calm. He was wearing his loose-fitting black leather trench coat and a short white scarf tied around his neck. It was the same outfit he'd been wearing hours earlier.
Do you mean this is your dream?
She was still unsure.
What else could it be?
This time it was Alex who looked around. They were in a huge natural cavern, the kind you see in postcards and adventure magazines. The cave was damp and full of moist limestone formations, down which thin streams of water constantly flowed, like glistening silver threads. Many of these formations looked like columns, perhaps supporting heavier structures too far off the ground to be seen from where Alex and Claudia were standing. The rhythmic pitter-patter of water droplets falling into the puddles on the cave floor was the only sound that broke the silence around them. A few rays of light pierced the darkness like sharp spears. They provided a soft glow that illuminated the gloomy surroundings of the cavern, without betraying its true dimensions or shape. Claudia wrapped her arms tightly around herself, in a vain attempt to keep herself warm. She shivered. In her bones, she could feel the oppressive dampness and chill of this huge cave.
This doesn't feel like a dream, Alex.
The young man smiled at the naivety of his friend.
We had too much beer last night,
he said.
We came home totally wrecked. Hansi had to help me into bed. I was out like a light.
But Claudia didn't feel the same. Everything felt too real to be a dream. That damp cold, a feeling of emptiness, of profound loneliness. She remembered overdoing it with the drinks the previous night, but she felt quite lucid now. She looked down at herself, for the umpteenth time. She was wearing the same clothes she wore the evening before. Her favorite white blouse, the short denim skirt she liked so much, and she was also wearing those heavy boots that Alex often teased her about. Although she was sure she had taken them off before going to bed.
It's all right, dear,
said Alex, using the short version of Claudia's name often favored by her close family and friends.
When I tell you of this tomorrow, I'm sure we'll have a few laughs. You're not actually here.
She looked at him intently.
I swear I'm here, and this doesn't feel like a dream, Alex,
she said, sounding very serious. She placed the palm of her hand on one of the rough stalactites. She could feel the cold layer of water condensing on its surface. She was captivated by its touch, staring at her hand soaked in the crystalline liquid.
Nothing has ever felt so real, and it's starting to scare me.
The certainty in the young woman's voice puzzled Alex and made him suddenly hesitate. His mind struggled to believe a situation that made no sense at all. If this wasn't a dream, what was it? Could it be anything other than a dream? Of course not. His common sense refused to yield.
Dear, you're scaring me now.
Alex was pretty sure that both the strange environment and the conversation with his friend were products of his mind. Surely the gallons of beer they had all drunk after the concert were to blame. That was it. Tomorrow he would wake up with a monumental hangover, and everything would be fine.
Guys, I'm afraid you're right to be scared,
a voice with a strong Scandinavian accent said behind them. Stunned, they both turned around. From behind one of the chalky columns, a tall, shaven-headed man came into view. He had a strong, square-shaped jaw, with a large blonde mustache adorning his upper lip. The tight tank top covering his immense torso revealed bulging muscles, which could surely only have been acquired through many hours of effort in the gym.
Hansi, you're here too.
I've been here for a while, Alex,
Hansi confirmed grimly as he stepped out of the shadows and approached them.
Long enough to know this is no dream.
Alex gave them both a skeptical look.
Come on, guys. Are you listening to each other? What are you saying? None of this is real. I'm at home right now, just like you. I'm in my room, in my bed. I'm sure I'm snoring like a foghorn. It was you who put me there, Hansi. For God's sake, what the hell?
As Alex turned towards Claudia, he was shocked to feel her hand strike him firmly across the face. He instinctively brought his arms up to protect himself as the force of the blow brought him to his knees. This startled everyone, including Claudia. She had not meant to hit him so hard.
I'm sorry, Alex. I'm sorry. I really am,
she said immediately.
Bloody hell, dear,
he said, massaging the red mark on his cheek caused by the stinging blow.
What the hell was that for? What's wrong with you?
Hansi helped him to his feet.
Are you all right?
He asked Alex.
Yeah, I'm fine. I'm fine,
Alex assured him.
I just don't know what the hell I did to deserve that slap.
I'm sorry, Alex. I'm really sorry. It was the first thing that came to mind.
What the hell were you trying to do by slapping me?
Did you wake up? A slap like that should wake you up.
Alex instinctively turned to Hansi, who was looking at him with a worried expression.
No, shit. I'm lucky still to be conscious.
A sudden wave of heat shot up Alex's spine to the back of his neck. It was an unpleasant and oppressive sensation that paralyzed him in place. For a moment, he couldn't move or even speak. His cheek throbbed painfully. He could feel the blood pumping intensely on the side of his face where he had been hit. A wave of fear swept through him.
You thought you were asleep, Alex. I don't blame you. I thought so too, at first.
Hansi comforted him, seeing the astonished expression on Alex's face.
And I've tried it all, man. I've pinched myself. I've punched myself. I've tried everything I can to wake myself up. But I'm still here.
I knew it. I bloody knew it.
Claudia was suddenly thrown into a state of deep anxiety. She put her hands on her head as she contemplated the unbelievable situation they were in. She began to pace like a wild cat in a cage.
Oh God! Oh God! This can't be happening! This can't be happening, shit!
Alex was still in shock, barely blinking. He was fixed to the spot, his hand still gently rubbing his cheekbone. He no longer cared about the pain. The only thing that bothered him was the voice in his head telling him, "This is real." Claudia looked around in despair. The shadowy grotto suddenly felt as small as a matchbox. She turned to Hansi, looking for an answer that no one seemed to be able to provide.
Where the hell are we? What kind of place is this, Hansi? How the hell did we get here? Oh God, what is happening?
It was a barrage of questions with no clear answers.
I don't know much more than you do, Dia,
The disheartened giant said.
I remember leaving Alex in his room and turning on the television. I didn't even make it to my bed. I must have dozed off on the sofa. I'm not even sure I turned the TV off.
So you were asleep too?
She said, trying to identify similarities in their experiences.
I remember going to bed. Alex was asleep. So were you. Maybe.
Hansi shook his head in resignation. He knew where his friend was going with all this.
But it still doesn't make sense, Hansi.
Do you think it makes sense to me? I don't know what this place is or how I got from the couch in the living room to here. What I am sure of is that this isn't a hallucination, believe me.
What makes you so sure?
Hansi was silent for a few seconds. Probably because what he was about to say sounded so unreal, even to him.
Because we're not alone,
He finally admitted. This statement snapped Alex out of his state of inertia and forced him to listen to his friend.
Come this way, I'll show you.
Hesitantly, the three friends made their way through a maze of stone spikes protruding from the floor of the gloomy cavern. The well-built Scandinavian led them to a natural wall of rock that was about 1 meter high. Hansi gestured for them to hide behind the wall and remain silent. Claudia and Alex were so unnerved that they followed his advice without hesitation. Hansi craned his neck to look over the wall and then turned to his friends. With a nod, he signaled for them to have a look. A youth in his late teens or early 20s sat a few steps away, partly hidden by the shadows of the cave. He was hugging his knees and had a lost expression on his face. His lips were moving, as if talking to himself, while he rocked back and forth in a compulsive manner. He wore branded sportswear and had a short, spiky hairstyle. Several gold chains hung from his neck.
Who is that guy?
Whispered Claudia. They were all at a safe distance, but she didn't want to risk being overheard.
If I told you, you wouldn't believe me,
The giant replied.
Do you know him?
Asked Alex.
Well, not really.
Said Hansi.
He came by the pub tonight, just before the gig. I wasn't at the door, but Dimitri was. Your friend from the comic shop had just arrived, so I went over to say hello. And this guy showed up with some of his mates. And they were really high, man, stoned and under the influence of whatever they'd taken. They wanted to come in, and Dima politely told them to come back another time. Then it all kicked off and we had to boot them out. Luckily, it didn't escalate because Dimitri's biceps are the size of a wrecking ball and none of them wanted to end up with a broken jaw. But they made it a hell of a fuss. Didn't we tell you about it afterwards?
Alexis had a vague recollection of the conversation when they all went out for a beer after the show.
Yeah, I remember.
Alex looked at the youth who was still sitting in silence, swaying back and forth in a state of shock.
But what is this guy doing here?
How should I know?
Hansi shrugged.
But look at him. I'd say he's realized by now that this isn't a dream, wouldn't you?
Claudia had to lean against the side of the rock wall as she tried to process what was happening. The two men let themselves drop to the damp, rough floor of the cavern. Their downcast faces said it all. Nothing made sense.
You're right.
Alex muttered.
You're damn right.
He struggled to gather his thoughts and say something coherent.
Except, there's more.
There's more.
Claudia sounded like she was done taking in new information.
I told you, I've been here for a while. I've had time to explore most of this cave. Follow me.
They walked to the far end of the vast underground cavern. There Hansi stopped and pointed with his finger. It was barely visible. It looked like a body, but it was hard to make out its exact shape among the silhouettes and outlines on the dark and uneven ground.
Is he dead?
Alexis wondered, dreading the answer that might follow.
I didn't want to get any closer.
Hansi admitted.
Maybe he's just asleep or unconscious.
She said, hopefully. The body of a teenager, about 15 years old, lay face down on the cold, hard floor of the cave. He seemed motionless, inert. Lifeless, perhaps, as Alex feared.
Let's get closer,
Claudia suggested. Her friends looked at her hesitantly. She gave them an accusing look.
We have to do something, don't we? We can't just leave him there.
She was absolutely right. They weren't the only ones who had ended up in this place, and getting the answers they so desperately needed meant interacting with these strangers. The group approached the body slowly, afraid to wake the sleeper. None of them knew what to expect. Slowly, the boy moved and turned his face, revealing his identity.
Hey, doesn't he look like...
Claudia started to say.
Yes. He's one of the guys who came with your friend from the comic shop. Isn't he, Alex?
Yeah, that's right. He hung around with us for quite a while after the show.
It looked as if the lad was just waking up.